Chapter 14. My uncle picked up the quill, then do so. Something else had taken over my movements. It was as if I were watching myself walk across the room, take the quill from my uncle, and sign in ink on the line next to Tori's name. Along with the movement, I heard an odd sound. I was humming. "What noise are you making?" Uncle William asked. "Stop it at once." Then Lawrence and Uncle William signed the document as witnesses. I closed my eyes and opened them several times, hoping that I had fallen asleep and was dreaming this. But every time I opened my eyes, I was still on my feet, clinging to the chair. "Someone's coming up the drive," Lawrence said. He opened the window and leaned out. "It's Sir John Robert." "Something must have happened," Uncle William said. "Quickly, Lawrence, come with me." The two of them left, leaving me alone with Tori. I could feel his smugness, hear it in his footsteps when he came to my side. I cringed when he touched my shoulder, but he didn't remove his hand. Instead, he ran his finger under my chin. "Mrs. Lisbette Burnsides." "Not yet," I hissed through my teeth. He leaned in and kissed me on the cheek and whispered, "But very soon." Gasping for air, I ran to the hall. I heard Sir John Robert's voice and ran towards the sound as my last source of sanity and comfort. But when I found him, Sir John Robert was frantically questioning my uncle. "Have you seen them?" "What would either of them be doing here at this time of night?" Uncle William said. "Who?" I asked, dazed but still able to recall important facts. "Trey and Henry," Sir John Robert said, turning to me. "They've disappeared. They must have gone to search for, Timothy." "Confound it, what a nuisance," Uncle William grumbled. "I suppose we'll have to go look for them. Lawrence, Tori, are you coming?" "Shouldn't I stay here to guard the women?" Tori asked. "With all the soldiers lurking about, we shouldn't leave them alone." "I hadn't thought about that," Sir John Robert said, looking keenly disappointed at losing an extra searcher. "We'll lock the doors," I said woodenly. "I'll wake Jelly and call the dogs into the kitchen. Nothing will happen to us." "Yes," Uncle William said, "I think Lisbette is right. We must find the boys before they can cause mischief. Lawrence, fetch Edgar and Darrell." Tori leaned into me and asked, "Will you wait for me, Lisbette?" I felt his lips brush against my cheek once more. My skin burned in shame because Tori had dared to do this in front of Sir John Robert, who, from the expression on his face, had momentarily forgotten the lost crown prince and his own youngest son. His stark confusion transfigured into a flash of pain as the truth of the situation became apparent. "What's this, Lisbette?" "You might as well know," Uncle William said. "Since Timothy can no longer expect to marry Lisbette, she's agreed to marry young Burnsides. She's done so by her own free will." His shoulders dropped as if a great weight, heavier than even the burdens he was already carrying, had been dropped upon them. "Is this true?" I was mute, unable to speak. "Lawrence, we're wasting time here," Uncle William said. "Tori, fetch your coat and come. The sooner we find the boys, the sooner we can all go to bed." For several moments, Sir John Robert and I stood alone in the hall, a strange silence stretching between us. Again I tried to speak, but the words still wouldn't come. But the tears did. They gathered at my eyelashes and then spilled over silently. "My dear," he said at last very quietly, "surely you don't love Mr. Burnsides?" I shook my head. It was not often I found myself speechless, but my throat was so tight that even if I had the words to explain to him, my voice wouldn't have cooperated. "Then I don't understand. If you aren't going to marry for love, why not marry my Timothy? You must know he is innocent of any crime. I swear to you that—" The words finally broke from my constricted throat. "I do know." "Then why? What is Tori Burnsides compared to my son?" I could have written a book with the answers to that question. But Uncle William had returned, shrugging his arms into his coat. "Are you ready, Sir John Robert?" Sir John Robert gave me one last look. "If you've truly made your choice, then you needn't explain to me. If only you're happy, my dear. That's all I ever wanted." A few minutes later, I saw them all gallop away into the night. I watched long after they were gone, still frozen at the door. There had been no need for Aunt Esme to inform me that by breaking my contract with Timothy, I would also break the heart of Sir John Robert. But by throwing Tori into the mix, I had gone beyond cruel. I'd insulted and spit upon every good thing Sir John Robert had ever done for me. With such feelings raging in my heart, there was not a chance that I was going back to bed tonight. I fetched my discarded shawl, ran outside, and plunged myself into the darkness, heading straight for the old church. Timothy, I hoped, would have the sense to stay away from that place, but I had no doubt that Trey and Henry were heading there right now. Knowing I could not take the road nor the bridge, I chose the quickest option left to me. Behind the cow pasture, beyond the avenue, there was a tree that had fallen across Dobb River years ago. As children, we had always used it to cross to the woods at Steedsley. No one used it but the Blackwoods or the Eastons, and so it was unlikely that the soldiers even knew it existed. I hurried in that direction, deftly following in the starlit paths I had taken so often as a girl. I reached the river and expertly climbed the roots of the tree to the place where the trunk lay prostrate across the water. I was not afraid of the dark, but as soon as I began to place one foot carefully in front of the other, I heard the sinister sound of popping below me. The deep mud, relic of the spring flood, was breathing below me like a sleeping giant. It clicked, sputtered, and sighed. But I had better things to do tonight than worry about mud. Ignoring the ominous colloquy, I crossed the tree and landed safely on the other side. Now I was on the cattle path that followed the river to the south pasture. I did not expect my way to be devoid of strangers while trespassing over the grounds of Steedsley. Twice I saw soldiers and twice I hid, but I never came close enough to anyone to be spotted. Without a horse the going was slower, but at least no one could hear me. Another advantage was that I could cut across fenced meadows, allowing me to bypass the village altogether. And then another stroke of luck came my way when over the horizon of trees a full moon lifted her face, bringing instant relief to my straining eyes. But I should have remembered that good luck was never with me long. I had stopped to crouch behind a tree to make sure the road was clear, when my hand brushed against the grass. At this time of night it should have been soaked with dew, but it was not. I swept my hand across the ground and discovered that everything around me was dry. It meant only one sure thing: an electric storm was brewing. Every few minutes I stopped to listen for the hum of lightning rods or bells, but so far the storm still seemed to be holding. At last I reached the hill above the old church. In the shelter of the trees I listened for signs of the boys or soldiers. Hearing none, I bent down into the tall grass and moved slowly down the hill. My shawl kept catching on the grass, so at last I removed it from my shoulders and tied it about my waist. I stole silently into the ruins. It was reassuringly empty inside the church, with not a sign of boy or man in sight. I started to leave when I remembered what Timothy had said about my footprints. Trey and Henrik might not leave as unique imprints as I had, but they would leave smaller ones. Sure enough, with the help of the moonlight, I found a footprint. Quickly I compared it with my own shoe and saw that it was only barely bigger than mine. Picking up a handful of straw, I swept the church floor clean of footprints. Dusty and cold, I took a moment to rest against the wall in order to think about what to do next. Which way would they have gone after searching here? Think like Trey, I told myself. If I were a 13-year-old boy, which way would I choose? Across from me was a broken window framing a moonlit landscape. A glimmer in the distance caught my eye. The water. He would almost certainly follow the river. I dashed toward the old road that led down to the river, praying that I was right. It was not, after all, Trey that I was worried about, nor was Sir John Robert. Trey knew these parts too well to be in danger of getting lost or hurt. It was the young crown prince who was in imminent danger. Henrik might be safe around the locals, but any one of the soldiers could instantly recognize him. Under normal circumstances, the prince should be quite safe, falling into the hands of his own military. However, I knew now that there were people about Easton who did not have Henry's best interest at heart. If he were to be found tonight, we might never see him again. At the river, I halted in the spinney beside the road. Peering behind the branches, I could see the river winding through the valley like a bright, shiny ribbon. The road it was itself, its less lustrous twin, mirroring like a dull echo beside it. Between the road and the river was a stretch of submerged grass and long strips of glimmering mud. I kept away from the road, hugging the shadow of the trees. When it became steep, I knew I was near the boggiest part of the river. Over the edge of the road was a sharp cut off where the earth dropped down into the vernal swamp below. A good sturdy fence maintained by the village had been constructed to keep animals and children away from the ledge. In the daylight, the ledge was a popular spot for pedestrians to enjoy the view of the river. But since the only view I wanted was that of Henry, I hurried past the fenced lookout, but then I heard something move in the bushes below. Startled, I jumped into the trees opposite the road. Someone was behind the fence, hiding in the bracken that grew up along the top of the ledge. I tried to hold my breath, but my heart had started racing. "Richard?" I asked mentally. "Is that you?" I peeled my eyes for some sign, some indication of who it might be, but there was nothing. Whoever was hiding had obviously heard me, and they were going to wait as long as it took before coming out. I had to take the risk. After all, if it was a soldier, I could merely claim to be out on a walk. Of course he wouldn't believe me, but how was he to prove otherwise? I moved out of my hiding place. "Who's there?" I whispered. A face emerged from the bushes behind the fence. "Lisbette?" "Trey Easton," I hissed. "You've scared me to death. Get out of here and get home right now. Everyone is out looking for you. Shame on you." "But Lisbette, Henry..." "What were you thinking, taking him with you? Don't you realize that..." "He's stuck." "Who?" "Henry." I looked around. "Where?" He turned around and peered over the ledge's edge. "Down there." I ducked between the fence rails and crouched down beside Trey. Henry was standing below us, just an arm length away. He was also plastered in mud all the way up to his chin. "Fancy meeting you here," he said, smiling up at me, his white teeth bright in the moonlight. "He just barely fell in before you showed up," Trey explained. "I've been trying to pull him up, but the mud's got a hold of him." "All right," I said to Trey. "You take one hand, I'll take the other. Your Highness, you do your best to pull free with your feet."